Reaction is pouring in after Governor DeSantis signed a flurry of bills regarding education.
One targets diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at colleges and universities. TV 20's Ethan Badowski tells us where people on both sides of the issue differ.
Our students demand the right to have the same course offerings as their peers at Harvard University, as their peers at UC Berkeley.
However, Governor Ron DeSantis says if they want to study curriculum regarding systemic racism, sexism, and oppression, UC Berkeley is the school for them, not UF. That was what he had to say after signing a bill that prohibits Florida colleges and universities from funding DEI programs. Senator Keith Perry, who supported the bill, says ending these programs will not harm the education provided to students in Florida.
Really what they're teaching is a whole different theory. And by the way, you can't conflate and say critical race theory or diversity, equity, inclusion are based on history. What they are theories. They are not based on history.
I also spoke with a student at UF who says she's concerned that her and her fellow students will not get the education that they came to the school in search of.
Everything that he's doing impedes on the education of students and allows students to not study what they actually want to study, and it allows people to have like a closed mind and not actually see the real world and for what it actually is.
UF leaders said they had nothing to add to the conversation when we asked them for comment. Officials at Florida Gateway College also had no comment on the issue. Santa Fe college leaders gave us a short statement saying in part they are reviewing all legislation that has been signed into law and will ensure their adherence. Ethan Badowski, TV 20 News.